anyway, what we want to do in real estate, in negotiation, is strive for a win-win outcome. The reason we say that is a lot of lawyers, and lawyers will assist our clients and sometimes the clients on the other party sometimes, and a lawyer's responsibility is really to have a win-lose situation. Their obligation is to win the case for their client. And whatever happens to the other party, they don't care. In a real estate, because we're not lawyers, we do a lot of negotiations, but we want to have a partnership, a consensus, a compromise, so that we look for a win-win situation. We want to be sensitive to the other party's position, the other agent's position, and also to our client's position. So, can everybody see the slideshow now?
Yes. No.
Yeah, it says it's paused again. I don't know what's going on here.
Just see, there's like a little. Oh, how do I write that? I don't see it, honey.
So you don't see the first slide? No. Says.
Oh, here's the chat.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay, I'm gonna, hopefully we don't get paused again and go to the next one. So when we are working with our client, whether we are working with a seller or we are working with a buyer, we need to know what their objectives are. You get to know your client very well in buyer consultation, in listing presentation and consultation, and you want to be able to understand where they're going, where they're coming from, what their objective is, how much money they have. All of those things lead you to be able to represent your client the best. So if you're going to negotiate for them, you need to know what they want and what their objective is. So what is generally a buyer's objective? Time. They must move soon due to a job or other pressing matters. They usually don't have a lot of time, or they wouldn't have started the process to begin with. Space, they need more rooms. Do they need more storage? Or do they need to downsize? Make sure that you understand what exactly they want. Costs, know what their budget is, know what their pre-qualification is, but also what they really, really want to spend and what their budget is. Location is very, very important. It's not necessarily has to be close to work anymore, because a lot of people are working offline, but I mean off the job, but it still is important for schools, for neighborhoods, being close to other friends or family, and make sure that you know why they are making this move. Is it family changes? Some things might be personal and sensitive to them, but they are all very important to for you to know, so that you can negotiate for your buyer. Obviously, this means you have to have buyer agency and that you are understanding all the responsibilities of buyer agency. So what is the seller's objective? If you're the listing agent, you need to also know what the objective of your seller is. Why did they call you? Why are they putting it on the market? What do they need to get? Money-wise and time-wise. But I learned this a long time ago. These three main reasons why sellers want to sell. It could be, they could not really be even mouthing this, that it could be something inherent in what they're looking for. But I learned that there are three main objectives of a seller, and that's to get the highest equity out of their house. Not necessarily the highest price, not necessarily the lowest commission. They are looking to get the highest return, the highest equity from their sale of their home. So if you're able to take those costs, take those expenses they're going to have, take their what needs to be done to their house so that they can get the highest equity out of their house. I had a call once a long time ago when I was an agent, and this guy called and he said, I'm looking for an agent who can give me the lowest commission. And I'm going to pick the agent that says they'll do it for the lowest commission. And I said, funny, I would think you'd want the highest equity. That stopped him in his shoes. He said, what do you mean? I got the listing because of that, and at 6%. Another thing a seller is looking for, whether subliminally or they're aware of, is the least aggravation throughout the selling process. They want you to take care of them. They want you to solve the problems. They want you to make this smooth. So they want to hire a very professional listing agent who knows how to negotiate, who knows how to prepare the property, who knows how to get what they need. And the third thing that every seller wants is the shortest time from list to sell. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions if they're building a house or something, but generally people put their house on the market because they are ready to go and they're ready to sell and get what they need. So as a listing agent, you should be prepared and how the whole selling process works. Go through the steps. It's not fast and easy. That's why you need a professional real estate agent to help you. This is how it takes step by step by step, and make sure that they understand before you get into receiving an offer and the adrenaline perks up. Make sure they understand on a very straightforward business that they know what happens at the beginning. They know what happens when the sign goes up. They know about MLS. They know about showings and open houses, inspections. All of these things are important to introduce these to your seller to get going. You want to be able to prepare them, and you have to be prepared for yourself. Give them a seller's estimated net costs. Make sure they understand what happens during an inspection, what happens during the final walkthrough. We get so many little issue problems coming up at the final walkthrough. Make sure that you review the comparables and the current market conditions in the seller's neighborhood. Know how to do a CMA, a comparable market analysis, that makes sense, that you can refer to as your information that's critical to them. Now, in today's market, we have a tight market. It's still a seller's market, more so in some neighborhoods than others. But we are still seeing situations where if you're working with a buyer, you're going to have some competition. There may be multiple offers. So your negotiation is really how much can you incentivize the seller to pick your offer without giving up your risk or the danger of you getting and buying a house that you really probably shouldn't have bought. So considering the risks, these are the common concessions to the seller being tried today. Thank goodness the WRA finally put together a new addendum AC, where it combines the use of the escalation clause, the inspection forgiveness, and the appraisal gap. Those three paragraphs are there for your use in writing a good offer and attaching this addendum AC to your offer. You don't have to use it. You don't have to use all 3 clauses, but only use what you and your buyer are willing to do. If you want to put in an escalation clause, it's all there. The wording is consistent for you to put in the amount and the cap that you're willing to spend. It's all there for the inspection contingency. Buyers saying they will not consider anything a defect or even an amendment of anything to be repaired if it's under a certain amount of money. So it puts a limit on what they're able to pay for, and that the buyer will take up that responsibility up to that limit. And the appraisal gap is also saying that the buyer is willing to cover some of the gap if there is a lower appraisal coming in. So those things are concessions to the seller. They're probably not, this addendum is not going to be used if we switch to a buyer's market. But it's very important now in this competitive seller's market that we're still in. So use it, understand it, call Steph or me if you have questions in the use of the addendum AC. Now, if you're not using the addendum, no inspection whatsoever. There is a disclosure that the buyer has to add to their offer to say they're aware of the dangers of not having an inspection, and that has to be added to your offer. But say if your buyer is a renovator or an investor or somebody that's going to do some work in the house and they really don't care about an inspection because they're going to tear it all up anyway, just make sure that your buyer is smart in making this decision. Buyer can also say no financing. Obviously, sellers like cash offers. They don't have to sit around and wait for that loan commitment. But with the no financing, it has to have current proof of funds. It has to be sent with the offer. What are the proof of funds, the funds that they're going to use right then at the time of the offer? Not when they get a loan or not when they get a bonus or they can cash things in before closing. Those are not proof of funds. It has to be at the time of the offer being written. They have this money sitting somewhere. And then you have to show evidence of where it's sitting. If you can convince the seller to take something less than that, good. But a no financing contingency means a current proof of available funds to buy the house. Your buyer can also say no appraisal contingency. No, I don't care. I don't want to use that clause. If they're getting financing, but they say no appraisal contingency, they can do that. They can get the financing contingency. It will have an appraisal, most likely from a bank, but it doesn't mean that the property has to appraise. If you have no appraisal contingency, it means that the property does not have to appraise in order to get the money. Some lenders will still allow the money to be given to the buyer, even if it didn't appraise fully. So if you're crossing off the appraisal contingency paragraph in the offer to purchase, don't forget that there still will be an appraisal with the financing in place, but not necessarily a cutoff of your offer. You probably always should give the seller right to cure in this kind of a market. Not giving the seller right to cure gives the buyer the option to cancel the contract if there's even one defect found. So sellers don't like that. They don't like to read that. They don't like that loss of control. When the seller has the right to cure, the contract can still stay alive if the seller decides to cure the defects. The buyer can also sweeten his offer by giving some concessions on prorations. Say the offer is written near the latter part of the year, buyer can say, I'll pay the full amount of taxes or I'll pay a certain amount of taxes, and concede some of the proration amounts. They can also prorate, decide to skip the association fees proration and say that they'll pay the association fees for the whole year or whatever. But these are all negotiation tactics in a competitive market where you're trying to beg the seller to choose your offer over several other offers. These are not considered smart concessions in a regular market. They will be, as I said, gone in a buyer's market. But right now, if we're still in a competitive market pocket of the city, you're going to have to give these things up to the seller in order to get your offers chosen. North Shore is still highly competitive. A lot of other Wauwatosa is still highly competitive, but then there are some other pockets of the city where the houses are starting to sit a little bit, and maybe the price reductions are starting to come in. When there's a low inventory, obviously supply and demand, the prices go up. But I want you to make sure that you know the market that your seller is, that your buyer is looking in. Make sure that you do your research in MLS and negotiate according to the market conditions.
I'd love to add here too, we were in Accelerator last week, we were talking, just stressing the importance of having those conversations with the listing agent ahead of time before writing an offer. You know, besides building rapport, but finding out what's important to the seller, what's important to, you know, in terms of terms, but also understanding if you're not writing in competition and asking those questions, how many offers are in, that will help inform how you write these offers. There's been examples of people who are pulling out all of the stops with these expansion of these terms, and it may not have been necessary, you know? So it's just goes to show to have more conversations with a listing agent before you're writing an offer. That's
exactly.
all.
And you know, there's some old thoughts like, oh, I want my offer to be a surprise. I don't want the listing agent to start, you know, getting anxious to get more offers if I let him know I'm writing an offer, blah, blah, blah. What Steph said is really smart today. Talk to the listing agent before you write. You know, when does the seller, what would be the optimum time for the seller to close? How much, you know, leeway does the seller have in occupancy and things like that. Knowing that, you can help your buyer write a much more competitive offer. Good, thanks, Steph. So in all other types of negotiation that you're going to do throughout this process of writing an offer and going to closing, there are terms like in the inspection, really brings up the negotiating lion again. Sometimes some buyers think that this is another way to renegotiate price. If you're working with a buyer as a buyer's agent and you see that that's their goal, try to discourage them from that. It should be truly about the defects and treating the defects and seeing if the defects can be cured or fixed. Either the seller can do them or the seller and the buyer can negotiate some kind of a middle ground where the costs are split or things can be repaired instead of replaced. All of this negotiating goes on during the inspection period. Using the amendment, if negotiations break down, that's when the notice of defect has to be sent. But in general, there are going to be times like final walkthrough and other things that your negotiation comes up again during the process. I wanted to share with you the different roles and steps that are required in just negotiating. Negotiating in a win-win position. And so these 4 steps are very important in any kind of negotiating. Again, keeping the win-win in place and keeping your client's needs protected. Number 1 is preparation. Make sure that before you start negotiating, you know the facts, you know what the market analysis is, you know what the sales are in the neighborhood. You are taking on a dialogue with the listing agent to make sure that you are getting a smart, factual position. Never negotiate out of fear. I think John Kennedy said that. Or never negotiate out of lack of information. As a fiduciary agent, you should focus on solutions. How can this be resolved? What can we do to make this better? What can we give you that you can give us? But be prepared to know everything about the other agent, know everything about what the other party needs from their deal, and create an alliance with that other agent. Never go in like a force to be reckoned with and assert your position and then take a stand. That's called win-lose negotiating. Go in as a partner, go in as a collaborator with the other agent, and see if you two can come up with a resolution that will satisfy both your clients. And then the second most important thing to remember in negotiating is communication. Always, always, always live conversation beats texts, emails, and with the other agent and with your client. I've seen some agents try to do all of this with text or emails, but mostly text. And then they say, well, it's how this generation likes to communicate. We don't like to talk on the phone. We like to just text, and makes it easier. The biggest thing that you're missing with texting, and I hope you're not negotiating with texting, is inflection. The inflection of your voice, your body language, if you're doing a Zoom or if you're meeting face to face. All of these things are subtle, important hints to pick up in negotiating. You can see a hedge, or you can hear a hedge. You can hear a doubt. You can hear positive outlook. You can't get any of that in negotiating with texts or emails. It has to be a live conversation on the phone or face to face. It's best to negotiate with your client face to face, to review the offer, to review the amendments face to face, even though I know we are not so much a face to face society anymore. But negotiation is so important, and that's why this has to be done with live communication and live conversation. It says actively listen to the other party's point of view. Don't try to argue it, listen to it. And remember to always include or consider your client's decisions. So many times when I'm responding to a question that I get from an agent here, I say, well, go back and ask your client. What do they want to do? Oh, the agent is trying so hard to come up with a thing, they've forgotten to talk to their client about it. Remember, it's their money, it's their deal, and always get their position. If you don't think their position is the best for them, try to explain that to them. The other thing, and that's where this third thing comes in, authority. Establish yourself as the professional, as the authority. Make sure that you can do what you say you can do. I've struggled as a manager for many years hearing my agents say, oh, that's not a problem. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. That is the minute that you can't do what you said to do, the minute you can realize that it is a problem and you can't solve it, you do totally lose your role in this negotiation. You lose the respect of your client, and you're probably going to lose the deal. So always make sure that you have the authority to do and say what you're going to do and to be able to follow through. And then the last thing that's very important in considering negotiations is patience. Don't be afraid to use time to your advantage. Instead of sending over an amendment and you want a response to the amendment right away, give them a few days to think about it. Make them worry, wonder. And this is either from the listing point of view or from the buyer point of view. Give them some time to squirrel in it. Or are they going to take this or not? Should I get back to them? If you give them a few days, maybe they'll get cold feet, but use it to your advantage. Don't be always in a rush to respond.
I think it's also fair to say, like, don't always be in a rush to come up with a solution either. Sometimes you need to sit on it and noodle on it for a couple days. I think a lot of us are so quick to think that we need to like have everything figured out within a certain amount of time, and get a response over. So
very true. I mean, you probably been in situations where you're given, like the amendment to the inspection deadline. It goes to midnight or whatever that last day is in the deadline. Maybe you let them sit until about 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock before you send your response. Things can change in negotiations. Positions can change, but if you keep this all over umbrella thought of we want it to win-win. We want the seller to feel good about this. We want the buyer to feel good about this. They both each got something. They both had to give up something. But you as the professional, you as the authority, and the person that can represent your client, you need to be patient. You need to be still in communication with that client and in communication with that other agent. So, any questions about that? Any questions that do you have on, is this too general? Is this not specific enough? What are your thoughts? Okay, everybody.
Joan, I was going to, and Steffi, I was going to say it really just depends on is how you read your client. If your seller is wanting, something sooner than later, and it really just depends on how long, has the property been only on the market a couple of days? Has it been on the market quite a while? That it creates more of an urgency perhaps with your seller. And so I agree with the whole patient and being patient, but sometimes you have a client that does not want to wait, and then you're kind of your hands, you have to do what they want you to do, I guess, in all.
And that goes back to the first step of being preparation. Make sure that you know your client. Make sure that you know the other agent. Always stay in a partnership with the other agent. I've heard sometimes agents go, oh, that listing broker, she's a real jerk and she won't do that. And she shares this with her client, the buyer. So now the buyer's upset with the listing agent, upset with the seller. All those personalities get together and they become a real mess. And that's where it's hard to come up with a win-win solution. Keep you and the other agent on the same level in communication, and make sure that your client, if you do have frustrations about the other agent, make sure your client is not aware of that. Keep your frustrations to yourself.
Right.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Well, and this is Nada. If I can just jump in on that, I am living that situation right now where I'm the listing agent on a house. The buyer agent has a buyer who he brought to the table. He pitched the business to be listing agent. He was not my friend at the beginning. It was immediately negative, and I'm under contract with him. We just finished inspection contingency. He is a totally different person right now. I could have knee jerk went off on him many times and he would have deserved it 150%. But, you know, Karen Trimble actually said this to me when I was on her team. If you can't get the listing, then go after them as the buyer agent. And so he's still getting 2.4% of the pie. And we're going to go to a successful closing in a few weeks. So you just, as easy as it is to get angry, at the end of the day, we just all want a paycheck. So that's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, Nada, thank you so much. I mean, that kind of input, those kind of stories from those of you who have been practicing for a while are so valuable to new licensees too, because it isn't just all black and white like we see it on paper and in contracts and, you know, on YouTube videos. There's a lot of personality in real estate, a lot of emotions in real estate. It's obviously a very traumatic decision for a buyer and a seller. A huge amount of money, the biggest amount of money, disrupting their life with a buy or a sell. So you're dealing with stirred up adrenaline and emotions and all kinds of things, and you have to come in as the cool negotiator. And this is this last slide, which I really I'm so fervently behind, that negotiation is the one true skill that you should be paid for. The better you are as a negotiator, the better value you are as a real estate agent. And it's something that is, you can practice, you can hone your skills in negotiating. As I said, if you ever see any kind of a WRA or a Keller Williams course being offered on negotiating, take it. Because the better you are at negotiating, the better real estate professional you will be in representing your clients. I've always said also, if you're raising children, you already have a good step up on how to negotiate, because children start at an extremely early age becoming excellent negotiators, getting what they want. So take that practice and start honing your real estate negotiating skills. The other point is we are not a lawyer state. Illinois is, a lot of other states are, and that just means as soon as a house is chosen, the whole contract is turned over to the lawyer, and they will negotiate price, they will negotiate inspections, they'll negotiate everything, inclusions, exclusions, all of that. And the real estate agent just follows along, goes to closing. But not in Wisconsin. We do all that negotiating. We negotiate from the very beginning in showings and writing the offer on price and terms. We go through the inspection negotiating. We go through the final walkthrough negotiating. We go through inclusions, exclusions, all of those things. It's up to us as Wisconsin real estate licensees have to do. Wisconsin Bar has given us permission to do that as long as we use their approved forms. We can't practice law outside of the forms. We can't give advice, like we can't help them with their record or things like that. But as long as we're within the contract, we literally are given permission to practice law that way. But what it means is Wisconsin real estate agents have to work harder. We have to know more. So you're a better negotiator the more prepared you are and the more information you have. So that's my story today. Any questions? I see there's some chats.
Joan, can I ask you something about appraisal?
Sure.
Okay, so finance commitment or contingency, boxes checked, my buyer needs financing. But strategy wise, I've seen this on both sides of the deal where someone doesn't mark appraisal, but clearly they're going to need appraisal. In my mind, that means that you can't default on the finance commitment because of the appraisal. If the appraisal doesn't come in, from a listing agent perspective, I would presume that that buyer is taking the ownership of the gap. Am I right in that?
No, not necessarily. It's all depends on the lender. The reason is if you don't have an appraisal contingency in there, that means if the appraisal is just $1 lower than the purchase price offered in the contract, they have to negotiate that. The seller has to make it up, or they have to split it or whatever in order for the deal to go through, for the contract to go through. If you don't have the appraisal contingency in the offer to purchase, but you do have financing contingency, it just means it's up to the lender. Some lenders, when they see an appraisal come in and it's lower than the purchase price, they will still provide the loan. It doesn't automatically stop the contract if the appraisal is lower, because the lender may say, oh, it's all right, we're able to handle it, it's within the loan amount, whatever. And so they'll still give them the loan commitment. The problem with that is if a buyer wants to use the low appraisal as a way to get out of the contract, he can't anymore, because if the lender's willing to give the loan even with a low appraisal, that buyer is still stuck in the contract. So that's the distinction. It doesn't mean that they have to that the buyer has to make up the gap. Now,
but there are situations.
The lender can say, I can't give you a loan commitment because the appraisal is too low. Now it goes into the same kind of negotiating you do if you have an appraisal contingency. Then the buyer goes to the seller and says, I need help. I'm not going to be able to get my loan commitment unless we can get some satisfaction to bring this price. So the seller either has to lower his price, or they have to make up the difference. They have to split the difference. Buyer has to come up, seller has to come down a little bit so that the bank is satisfied with that lower appraisal. But it means there are some cases where a low appraisal, you will still get the loan commitment. So that's all it means. But if a buyer is trying to get out on a financing contingency, get out of the contract, it's not guaranteed that he'll get out just based on the financing appraisal.
Right, but if it does come in too low, and then the buyer is does not qualify for the loan anymore, then there's nothing. Even if that box isn't checked, I think, Nada, I agree. It's kind of tough because you hear two sides of this, like, oh, you have to have that checked. Otherwise, there's no way a buyer can, if it doesn't appraise out, there's no way the buyer's going to get out of it. He has to buy it. But the reality is some banks are just, they're not going to loan to a buyer that can't pay for the house.
Right. I'd like this. Yeah, go ahead, Joni.
Well, I'm just saying, so the buyer will get out because they didn't make their financing, not because they didn't make the appraisal. They didn't get the financing commitment because there was a low appraisal, but financing will be the contingency that they would get out on.
So as a savvy listing agent might want to address that in a counteroffer and say, if you don't see an appraisal contingency, you might want to counter back and say, if the lender is still going to require an appraisal as a part of the financing contingency, then buyer agrees to cover any gap in appraisal. and they cannot they cannot use a low appraisal as a way to get out of a financing contingency. Kind of call them, out,
Right, and you can't use the AC appraisal gap if you don't have the appraisal contingency marked in your offer.
Right. Does that make sense, Nada?
Oh yeah, I've actually been in every situation, and now it's so weird. It's only 2 years that I've been doing this, but I had a buyer that had the lender was a friend of his. He used the finance contingency. The deal cammered, end of story. Bad feelings on all fronts, not with the agent. The agent was fine. It was not the greatest situation, but the agent and I did have open dialogue. And the best advice I've ever received as a buyer agent is press your clients. How much do you love that house? If it's going to come up short, are you going to love it 5 grand short, 10 grand short? Because the goal is to get the deal done, not to try to figure out how it's going to blow up. So I try to do that as a buyer agent. As a listing agent, you can do all of what you guys just said, and that is the protections. That's the best route. It can still not turn out how you think, but at least you fought for your client on the front end as much as you could.
Well, we're in this predicament. I mean, literally, we didn't have these questions 10, 15 years ago. We're in this predicament because of multiple offers and the price being escalated up way out of what their actual comparative market value is. So no wonder we're having problems with appraisers, because we're in the bidding war. We're jacking this price up higher than the value. And the appraisers have that in mind a little bit, but they're not going to forgive 30,000 over the list price, matching that as a good appraisal for that property. So that's why we're having these situations come up in our offers, even the addition of the appraisal contingency being relatively new. And then the brand new addendum AC further trying to resolve this. But we're going to keep raising the price with escalation clauses and multiple offers. We're going to continue to have appraisal problems.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for you seasoned agents for being on, by the way. This is exactly what Joni and I love.
Yeah.
Well, Steffi, I mean, before Joni came on board, I mean, you know, Steph, I mean, I'm sure you've got plenty of agents that can share the situations that we've been in with hard to work with other agents. And it's tough to keep you have to keep your professionalism intact when these other agents can be very difficult. I would say for the most part, everyone, I think, works pretty well together. But once in a while, you run into a wall and it's tough. So it's nice to have you and Joan in the mix to I guess, help us with our situations and also keep our temperature in check.
Yeah.
Leah, do you have a question?
I do. I also want to share that one thing I was proud of with myself was offering post occupancy. I had some buyers who weren't on a strenuous timeline, and so they were able to offer post occupancy, and I think that's what won them the deal, because the sellers had a special needs son and they were remodeling their next home, and so yeah, that was one tactic I used. But I also had a question about, I'm still confused about the inspection and giving that threshold. How does that negotiation work? Is it, because I have a deal now where we gave $1,000. Anything under $1,000 we won't ask for. Does that mean for one particular item? Or defect? Is it accumulation of defects? And then how do we negotiate once that inspection comes back and we need to find out quotes or whatever.
Yeah, I think Steph and I agree that this is definitely muddy water. It can be an accumulative amount. It basically just says you're not going to send an amendment or a notice of defect of any amount coming in under a certain amount. But where we go from there is all in how it's listed, all in how the addendum AC is written, and basically what it means is that the buyer is going to be responsible for any costs up to that cap, that threshold.
And it is a cumulatively, yeah, so it's not like $1,000 per item, it's.
Right.
Okay. So
And-
then if that
and-
cumulative,
And to prove that amount, it's getting those estimates. So making sure that you're prepared as a buyer's agent to be calling in for follow-up inspections or, follow-up inspections and getting dollar amounts.
okay,
Yep.
that helps because that's where I am right now. So I just wanted to make sure I was on the
And
right
then
path.
addendum AC has a place where you can automatically extend that time to get those estimates, which I think is a really good provision that was added.
Yeah.
Good. Perfect. Okay.
Any other questions?
Can I
I also,
just a different
Yeah.
kind of
Sure.
question that I just have, not related. I'm representing sellers and buyers on a single party off market. And the sellers, when they signed it, they put the date of 8/26, but it was 8/25 was binding acceptance. Everyone's on the same page and all good, but now I'm like, shoot, it says 8/26 on the signature line. Does it matter? It does. Okay.
Well, technically it does. And the way to resolve it is just, you can hand out an amendment that just states what the binding acceptance date is and both parties sign it, so it's confirmed. Because, even getting to the closing, all the dates are critical in the contract. You all have to be on the same page of what the so I just always recommend just float out a little amendment that just confirms everybody knows that the acceptance date is, August 26th, 2020.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. I want to add in sort of a round for this whole topic. When you are doing a co-broke situation, especially here in the North Shore, Wauwatosa, in the community of Lake Country, agents get to know other agents. They know, oh, this agent always has really good listings, or this agent always prices too high, or, it gets to a point that we all know each other, especially the longer we all work together. And agents get a certain reputation. All I'm saying is make sure that your reputation is always known as she's a good negotiator, or she always looks out for both sides. In negotiations, it's a win-win. It's not, she's not a bulldog kind of thing, or he's not a bulldog. I would always keep this in mind, because when you're considering multiple offers, say if seller and the listing agent are considering multiple offers, even though the seller chooses which offer they want, the listing agent can also influence which agent they want to work with too. And in that vein, as we all get to know each other, make sure that your reputation is one that say, oh, she's professional, or he's really smart, or I like working with him. Be that kind of person, because that personality that your reputation is built on will always give you an advantage in negotiations. Because people want to work with you. People will want to believe you and trust in you. So it's just something to always work on, especially in real estate. So any other comments?
Thank you, Joan.